Welcome to yet another edition of Inside Carolina's Day After Podcast. I am Tommy Ashley. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirts and Congruity. That, of course, is Buck Sanders in the middle and Jason Staples to my right, on my screen at least. The three of us are here to talk about the third straight loss for North Carolina. Pittsburgh comes to Kenan Stadium for the first time in history, wins a game on the Kenan Stadium turf, 34-24. Buck, as always, I'll open thoughts with you because I'm piggybacking you guys today. So I'm going to copy and adopt y'all's takes on this one. But, Buck, what do you have to say about it? Saw your column this morning. Seems pretty simple.
Well, if you're going to be copying everything I've got to say, this is going to be a very short show um, because there's not too much to say. I thought that in some ways this game was sort of a return to normalcy for North Carolina in the sense that there was no one thing that leaped out to me. I think the offense played pretty well overall, although they still only put 17 points on the board, really. Um, I have some questions about tactically or strategically what North Carolina was trying to accomplish, particularly on defense. Um, but nothing in here jumps out as like a team where all the seams were busting apart. I mean, the special teams played okay. There was no special big gaff there. They made a big play actually in special teams with a nice return. There was a nice interception for yardage. There are things to talk about, but no one area I thought that was responsible for this loss. It was a close game, even though the margin was 10 points. Um, it was a game that went down to what I thought was the missed catch on the interception. They catch that ball and they got a chance to win the game. North Carolina was a beat slow. They got beat to the point of attack. When Pitt needed to make a play offensively, they made it, and North Carolina was not able to reciprocate.
Jason, this one thing, I don't know if it's a good thing saying it was a normal Carolina football game because, to Buck's point, um, and actually I agree with Buck, really, when I think about it. You kind of like slow train to Georgia. You saw the train coming. It's like somebody get off the tracks, and never happened. That interception at the end there would have given Carolina an opportunity, but to Buck's point, a beat slow getting there. Your overall thoughts here? Carolina just couldn't get over the hump, and Pittsburgh had the better quarterback. And we talk about how the better quarterback wins games, and that's what happened on Saturday, I thought.
I mean, yeah. There's the thing. The only thing I'd add is that I didn't think it came down to that interception per se. That's not the play that I would highlight as much as Carolina going 2 for 6 on fourth down.
Which went straight bandit, going six times on fourth down. Which, yeah,
Two of 6 on fourth down. You get 2 fourth downs inside the red zone where you don't get what should have been high percentage fourth down opportunities. You go 1 of 2 on each of those and score a touchdown on that drive, and that game, you may well win that game. It's a completely different game. You miss both of them, and you get nothing. If you get the first one and you score, then you maybe kick a field goal on the second one and win the game, right? So it's just this, like you said, they couldn't get over the hump. My feel is that basically you had two teams where they were pretty evenly matched, and the numbers illustrate that. But Pitt just was the overall better football team, and in terms of the various three phases of the game, you didn't do any one thing that cost you the game. You did a couple things that kept you in the game. I mean, you had a long pick six. You had several other things that that were big plays that gave you some opportunities, but bottom line, one team was just a little better than the other team, and this was just kind of the way you might put it. If I was headlining this, it wouldn't have been Tom Petty, although again, you can't have too much Tom Petty, so nothing wrong with that. As I've said, if you have a choice in life of who you want to be or what you want to be, being Petty's a pretty good choice. But but my choice probably would have been a routine loss. This was just a routine loss. This is just, you went out and you got beat.
Miles and miles and miles of Tom Petty. But one thing that I might be petty about is I don't think this team has an identity at all. 6 games into the season, are they a power running team? Are they short passing team? Are they go for every fourth down at every situation team? What do they do well on defense? They stopped the run decently well on defense. Pitt rushed for less yards than Carolina did without any sacks. No sack yardage built in there. What is the identity of this football team? We said on these shows before the season we would know what this team was after Duke, after Pitt. Well, here we are, halfway through the season. What you got here?
Well, depends on which side of the ball you want to look at first. But, I'm going to talk about the defense first because going into this game, we knew that Pittsburgh was not great in terms of protecting the quarterback. Their sack numbers were worse than North Carolina's sack numbers going into the game. And we know that North Carolina, in terms of making sacks, have been better this year than they have been in previous years. But at the end of the day, North Carolina doesn't get a sack. And what I'm not sure of, because although I watched the game and parts of it I've watched twice, I can't figure out if North Carolina intentionally was less aggressive on defense than they normally are, or whether they were just ineffective against Pitt yesterday for whatever reason. It could be either of those things, but their failure to kind of scratch in terms of sacks, and in the fact that they only had 4 quarterback hurries, which Pittsburgh had 11. So I don't know, and I'll be interested to hear tomorrow what Jeff Collins says about we backed down on the aggression because of the quarterback we were playing, because we were afraid of that they might hit us deep more often. But it seemed to me that there was less aggression on play calling.
Jason, your thoughts there? It felt like Holstein had time to throw. He made some great throws in that game. Like I said, he looked like Drake playing out there and made the throws, made every play that was necessary. But your thoughts on Buck's question about the approach on defense? Clearly Holstein's legs were important in this one. What'd you see watching it from your eye?
Yeah, my thought was that they went with less overall direct pressure precisely because of the ability of the quarterback to run a little bit. It's the same thing that happened with JMU, and we talked about that after that game. The reason that they didn't bring heavy pressure much in that game is after the first couple plays of the game, it was clear that that quarterback could really hurt you with his legs. And so then you get a little simpler and you don't put yourself in a position where he's breaking the pocket and taking off upfield every play. And I just thought that was the primary result. That was what they went with they went with the more mobile quarterback game plan than the we're playing a statue, so we're bringing the heat game plan. And so far this season, you can see the difference between the two. And one of them is a whole lot more effective than the other. You'd much rather play if you're playing against North Carolina, you'd much rather have a mobile quarterback that can threaten them than not. And I mean, obviously, all things being equal, you always want a better athlete at whatever position you've got. But it does seem to make a pretty big difference in how they're handling things.
Looking at a lot of folks want to talk about Alonzo Barrett, and he certainly probably made some money against North Carolina. Go check out the ULM. Louisiana Monroe beat James Madison. And Barrett was pretty good, but he also got sacked 3 times for 30-some yards and losses. Pittsburgh, Buck, to your point, had given up more sacks than Carolina and had none. Let's talk a little bit about this approach, because we heard Collins was going to be aggressive, and they've dialed it back. And if you've got a coach, and this is where the interesting thing in coaching matters, and these should be questions asked tomorrow, and certainly we'll try to do so, is if you have an approach that you blitz and you bring mayhem and all that all the time, but then you don't, is it being neutered from somewhere else? Or is it fear of the deep ball like we talked about? And Pitt still got them. I mean, Pitt still was able to accomplish what they needed to. But we saw the what. What do you think the why is here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably part of it, as Jason already alluded to, had to do with the fact that they were facing a quarterback that could hurt them with his arm and his legs, and they chose perhaps to try to limit one or the other and ended up doing neither one. So I don't know what the intent on. Maybe they were trying to protect their secondary, which has not been as good this year as any of us expected, at least on this panel. And somebody asked the question in chat, what's my impression of Collins now? Well, my impression of Collins is he's a pretty good defensive coordinator, but for whatever reason, they have not put all the pieces together at UNC to this point. Why that is, it just defies gravity to even talk about it. What they're trying to accomplish on defense, were they intentionally trying to dial it back? Was Mack saying this, being aggressive caused us to give up 70 points against JMU? Maybe we should dial it back a little bit. I don't know what's going on there, but at least to me, it looked like, and I have not examined this game, frame by frame to this point, but it looked like they were less aggressive on defense.
Let me read a quote from Mack Brown in the postgame, and this is what I mentioned on Inside Carolina Live on Saturday about the vibe given off by the head coach to the public. I understand that what's said in the locker room may be completely different than what's said in public. We've certainly seen that over the last couple of weeks to be actually true. But Mack talked about it in the postgame, Jason, and this is your point here on the 4th down, and then I want to get into the other numbers. We didn't think we were going to stop them very well going into the game. What is happening there that a head coach has that mindset going into a game? The team certainly took that approach. Collins certainly took that approach. But, Jason, that led to going forward repeatedly on 4th down when you've got one of the best kickers that Carolina's had. It's another point of I don't know what this team is doing. I don't know what this team is trying to accomplish. And I don't know what Mack Brown's trying to accomplish saying things like that. But Jason, you've got some numbers in front of you as far as the defense.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on staffs where, and I've talked about this before, where you go into every game and the question is, okay, how much are we really going to stop this team? And you're looking at it and you say, okay, this is our number. This is the number we have to get to on offense. If we don't score this number, we're not winning this football game. And that's really what Mack is talking about there. He's talking about they're coming into the game. They did their scout, and they said, Pitt's going to score this much. Pitt's going to score 30, let's say. They probably came out with Pitt's going to score 31 points. Somewhere in there. Pitt's going to score over 30. We're going to have to score mid-30s to guarantee a win. To give ourselves a shot at a win, I should say. Magic numbers in there. So they coached like they needed to score that number of points. And the thing is, they were right. Pitt scored 34. So that's what he's referring to. I guarantee you that was the conversation that they had, is they're going to score about this much based on what we have here, based on what they have there, based on how they've executed so far this year, based on how we've executed so far this year. This is probably what's going to happen. And then you go out there and you're positively surprised if your defense gives up 17 or 20, right? But the bottom line is you know going into every game how many points we probably have to score, right? You should be evaluating that. I have no problem with that. I actually think that in the two big fourth downs inside the red zone, I think they made the right call on each one in terms of going for it. In the one case, Hampton missed his gap. If he's over 6 inches, he gets that fourth down easily. He just flat out it's a rare situation where he doesn't get it done in short yardage. But you know, how many times if I gave you or I'll just ask this, if I gave Mack Brown or you were in Mack Brown's situation before the game and I said, okay, you can play this whole game out, or you can have a fourth and about half a yard where it's their team versus your team, and you get to run Omari and Hampton for the game. Single play decides the game. Which one are you taking?
Of course I'm taking the single play, but it doesn't work that way totally. I agree with your
understand that, but my point is you're going to get that most of the time. I have no issue with how they decided to go for it on fourth down.
Right.
They needed to, because those were situations where you've probably got 75% chance of getting that with Omarion, if not higher, and he just flat missed it, and that was on him. The line did a pretty good job there, and he just kind of missed it, and their defensive lineman made a great play getting a hand in there and being able to slow him up enough to get support there in time. That doesn't happen very often. The other one, I have some issues with the play call, not with the call to go for it on fourth. I thought it was a kind of a subpar play call, because I come from the school of thought where you come into every game with, say, 3 2-point plays. So they're plays that you reserve for 2-point conversions and fourth downs, and 4th and 2 or fewer yards. And you go to that well when you have to. And that to me was where you break out a 2-point play. And that was just not a good 2-point play. You got to have something better than that. And so that was more my issue. If we probably aren't going to stop them enough, going to have to score in these cases, you better come in with a couple extra things in the arsenal to be able to say, okay, well, we're going to have this marginal call. What little wrinkle can we do to take advantage of how they like to do things? So I did mention in our internal chat that I've got the pressure numbers in front of me here.
Let me hit on the fourth. Hold on one second. Let me make this point. And German, or I'm not sure the name, how you pronounce your name. Sorry about that. But you make a point that I believe. I don't believe in chasing points until you have to. And if you kick a field goal, go up 10-3, or whatever it was, then you get points on the board. And you don't have an offense that gets demoralized because they didn't make a fourth down play that early in the game. So that's always been my approach. You don't chase them. You don't chase 2-point conversions until you have to have them. I do believe in kicking a field goal when you're down 10 with 2 minutes left, going ahead and getting the field, those type situations. But I don't agree with the chasing points aspect of it that early in the game, because you never know what's going to happen in the game. Even if you say –
I just disagree with that. I really do. And the numbers, the analytics are really, really against you there.
Well, if we can go on analytics, then go for it every time. Never punt.
The analytics do not say to go for it every time. You follow the analytics tell you based on strength of team and what your strengths are and all of that, and their strength of team or whatever. Here's what 100,000 prior situations that match this. Here's how they've broken down. And so these are the odds that you're looking at that likely map onto what you do. Now, a good coach takes those numbers, says, okay, analytics say that you have about a 62% chance of winning the game if you make this choice, and a 57% chance of winning the game if you make this choice. And then you choose between that based on your own individual situation. And you go, okay, all things being equal, is probably tilt toward the 62. But in this situation with my team, I think this is close enough that I choose the 57 because of whatever I think about that's what good coaches do. But the whole, like, don't chase points, just put points on the board kind of thing, I couldn't disagree more with that. Unless you're playing a game where you think you're going to be able to stop the other team a bunch. Again, you come into certain games and you know, I'm not going to win this game with field goals. They're going to score touchdowns. I have to score touchdowns or I'm not going to win this game. And so this isn't so much a matter of chasing points. The issue is you only get 11, 12 possessions over the course of the game. When you do the scout coming into the game, you say, okay, they're going to score 34, 35 points probably against our defense based on how we've played, our overall health level, based on how they've played. That means we need to score 5 touchdowns or score, say, 4 touchdowns and 3 field goals. That means if you don't score 5 touchdowns, that means you have to have 2 additional scores that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So you can score 5 times if they're all touchdowns, or you can score 7 times. And so what you're now doing is you're now saying, look, I get down inside the red zone. That's really valuable territory. And if I have a long yardage situation where it's unlikely that I get this, it's 3rd and 7, you kick the field goal. 3rd and 8, and you're on the 15, 18 yard line, you kick the field goal. But you're 4th and 1, 4th and 2 from the 6, from the 7 yard line, from the 12 yard line, early in a game. There are 2 reasons you go for it. One is odds are, so football games are won almost always. Football games are won by the team that scores more touchdowns, not by the team that kicks more field goals. Secondly, if you miss it, the other team, if you don't get it, the other team has to drive 90 yards.
Which is what they did.
And so now the value, which only, and if they do that, if they do drive 90 yards, then all you're doing is you're saying, yeah, well, they scored a touchdown. And if we'd have kicked a field goal, they're still up by 4 because they're that much better than us on offense. So all that does is confirm the decision that you needed to go for it on 4th down. That's why you do it that way.
I just don't think it's a video game.
But
I get it. I mean, the book scorecasting sort of lays out that. But get in here on this. I just don't think – you never know how the game's going to go. But I do know that when I have points on the board, that helps me towards my goal of winning. I'm not competing against a hypothetical. How many times have we heard coaches say, I don't do hypotheticals? Well, go for it on 4th down and not get points on the board in the first quarter is a hypothetical, going against the same hypothetical that you hear so many talk about they don't do. I don't know. It's just my approach. I just say you score as many points as you can. You score 0, that is worse than scoring 3. Either way, if you get blown out, it doesn't matter. But you sort of change narratives when you get points on the board, and we can disagree. I mean, are you
planning to win the game, or are you planning to keep it close? If you're planning to keep the game close, you kick the field goal. If you're planning to win the game, you try to get touchdowns.
I'm playing the game that I'm playing right at the moment. I don't think they came in and said, James Madison, we got to score 71 points because James Madison's going to score 70. I don't think you come in and you say, well, Pitt, go Buck. I see the hourglass. Get in here.
Yeah.
I just
you told me to get in here about 30 minutes ago. Get in here,
I just
Buck,
think
and then and still not a word to edgewise I can get in.
I know
Here.
Buck's last snap was at the 8-minute mark. Tell me what you got, Buck.
You better score a touchdown, Buck.
You know. I think there's a couple of things going on here. Is that some of the thinking that we have in football predates analytics, right? I mean, once upon a time, anybody that went for it on fourth down, I mean, unless you maybe on the goal line, 4th and 1, and didn't kick a field goal instead, would have been called stupid. I mean, 40 years ago, that's the way it was.
Well, I'm old.
But just like Vegas, the graveyards, gamblers' graveyards are full of those people who ignored probabilities. They had a system that would beat the probabilities. They had a way around the probabilities, and they went home hitchhiking, with hopefully getting a drink of water at a gas station every now and then. So I think that, the science of it, and it's going to get pushed back against those people that they totally grew up, like myself, grew up in an era where you always take the points. You always take the points. You don't leave that drive without the points. And analytics have proven over the years to debunk that. So the whole let's not chase points idea is one that was developed, when Fred Flintstone was driving around in his car. So the play, just like I agree with Jason on this, it was the right call to make to go for it on 4th down. The execution wasn't as there on either of those things. But he missed 2 of those plays. If he makes one of those, right, and they go on to score a touchdown, then the next time they're down 4th and close to the goal line, they can kick a field goal, the game might be over. And I agree, people want to see what works. And if it doesn't work, it's wrong. And that's a lot of what's going on in this case. Because those plays did not succeed, they were a mistake. And you can't view it in a rearview mirror with that. You've got a false clarity there that doesn't exist.
And that's why, by the way, coaches in the past didn't chase the points, as they would call it, and you always take the points or whatever, is because the general rule in football in previous eras was you have essentially coaches coaching on the basis of, okay, well, what do people say if I don't get this? Coaching scared, coaching not to be criticized, as opposed to coaching to give yourself the best chance to win the game. And those are two different things. I can go out there and keep losing close, where everybody goes, man, he just keeps making the right decisions or whatever. But no, they're not the right decisions, because they're not the decisions that make me more likely to win the game. And that's the part that we have to do. Now, I was going to read these blitz numbers off for you. So
let me do Johnny T-shirt first,
Ooh, okay.
and then we'll do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How many times do you see in basketball people say, you don't need a 3-pointer here, you don't need a 3 here, get a quick 2? That's my
and yet
point.
Everybody shoots the heck out of the 3 ball now,
Yeah.
because if you shoot more 3s, you're more likely to win the game. Nobody shoots mid-range jumpers anymore because you're not likely to win shooting them. That's the thing.
To win the game.
The bottom line is, the reasoning behind that is you have to score points to win the game.
Exactly.
If you come up with zero,
you need to score touchdowns.
Kick the field goal.
If you shoot mid-range shots, if you do that stuff, you're not going to win the games. You've got to take the 3s enough to win it. Even if you miss them, you at least gave yourself the chance to win by taking those 3s.
Yeah, and before anybody says, "Oh, you're just coaching from the rearview mirror," I've been a not chase the points guy forever. So I don't want to hear that if it worked, you wouldn't be saying this. Yes, I would. I would just be, oh, it worked out anyway. No. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, sponsors of this podcast, sponsors and great friends of Inside Carolina subscribers. Get in on their sales, get in on their discounts for Inside Carolina premium subscribers. Just get in on Johnny T-Shirt as much as you can. We got to support local. Go to East Franklin Street or go to JohnnyT-Shirt.com and order whatever you want Carolina related. Folks are getting hyped about basketball. They've got the basketball jerseys and the basketball swag as well. That'll be interesting next week when Carolina has the blue-white game after the Georgia Tech game. We'll be interested to see how the fans work. But what the fans need to do before the football game is go to Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street and load up with all the gear you need. They have great customer service, great friends. National guys will pay the bills. We'll be back with Jason's blitz numbers on the day after. All right. I've let y'all raise my blood pressure a little bit. We're on the day after. Just a normal loss, a routine loss, as Jason called it. But, Jason, let's talk about this defense. Holstein had been sacked a lot, pressured a lot, not much of either on Saturday. What you see from the numbers?
So, looking at this, I've just got the blitz per drop back rate. And looking at this, game 1, 25%. So they blitzed a quarter of snaps, game 1 against Minnesota. Then 37.8%, game 2. Game 3, 1.7%, or I'm sorry, that's the 32%, 1.7% defense giving up 20-plus yard plays. 32% in game 3. Game 4, which is JMU, 27.5%, so dropping down again. So Minnesota and JMU both under 30%, the other two over. Then last week against Duke, 35%. And then this week, 17.8%, which is by a good margin the lowest blitz per drop back rate. Now, you can see in the games that they chose not to blitz as much, sort of the reason that they that they chose not to, and that those were games where they were getting shelled in terms of long defensive plays given up. They gave up 11% 20-plus yard plays against JMU and 10.4% against Pitt. Now, the question is which direction the causality goes on that, right? Are you giving up more long plays because you're not getting pressure? Or are you not blitzing because you're giving up more long plays? But the overall pressure rate, actually, with the exception of game 2, which is an outlier because it's against a really bad team, right? That's the Charlotte game. 35. These are the actual pressure numbers, not the blitz numbers. So this is how often they produced pressure on a drop back. 35.7% against Minnesota, 51.4 in game 2, game 3, 24.0%, game 4 against JMU, 22.5, game 5 against Duke, 21.6, game 6, 23.9%. So honestly, the overall pressure rate didn't really change in the last 4 games at all. I mean, they had a higher pressure rate this week than they did last week against Duke. It's just that when they got pressure, they had success less often. And when Pitt did make a play, they made more big plays down the field, which tells you that their real concern was that they couldn't hold up on the back end against Pitt. They know they got one guy who can keep locking players down, but they're getting beat at those other spots.
It is an interesting dynamic, and Buck, I want to get you in here on this. Well, I wanted to go back to Jason, but I didn't want to be unfair because
it's your call, buddy. You can go back to Jason if you want.
You bring the sanity and the thing. I've got my child in the chat not siding with me. By the way, if you want your rent money, son, you better start posting positive Tommy things.
So Davis agrees with me.
He agrees with probably anybody but me, but that's an interesting thing going on there as well.
At least you raised a smart kid.
Just study, son. Remember, Daddy's always right. Let's talk about the approach on defense, Buck, because the PFF numbers are interesting. They sort of flip this week. We had guys that were in the tank last week that played well against Pitt. We had guys that played well that weren't, according to the numbers, and Greg Barnes will post that story. But it's part of the identity question I have, Buck, is what is this team trying to accomplish? I mean, if you get scared and nervous, scared money don't make money. What do you think here overall on the defensive performance we've seen 6 games in from Jeff Collins, a guy that, according to the chat, and they're right, we were very, very high on coming into Carolina and making a difference?
You know, to me, the whole thing is more of a mystery than it's ever been before. I think it was the right thing, and I think very few people would disagree with the statement that the Chiswick style of defense was more of a defense that might work at the turn of the century than in 2025. So abandoning that style of defense and going to a more aggressive style, I think, was the right move. I don't know why it is that North Carolina cannot establish an identity on defense. It doesn't just seem to matter who is the defensive coordinator anymore. I mean, off the top of your head, Tommy, if I had to ask you who was the best defensive coordinator you remember in recent years, most recently, who would that be? Recent defensive coordinator.
I mean, is Torbush recent or not?
Well,
it's recent for us. It's probably not recent for a lot of people in chat.
But within the last
the question
20
is, I don't
years, last 20 years, who's the most effective defensive coordinator UNC has had? It doesn't seem to matter, and I don't know why. If somebody else can explain it, I'd love to hear it. But, you know, I think that their personnel is not doesn't justify the last 3 losses. I don't think their justify was worse than the last 3 teams they've played. I think it was probably on average better if you're just looking at objective factors on defense. So why is it that, I know the defense played a huge part in obviously giving up 70 points to JMU against giving up 21 straight points to Duke and giving up 34 points to Pittsburgh. If there is some objective analysis, some way you can put all the numbers together and all the different personality factors together, if there was some way to develop an algorithm that would explain this ineptitude on defense, I'd love to see it. But I don't think it's out there. And certainly Collins has disappointed. The North Carolina defense has not been as good under Jeff Collins as I anticipated it being. I'm often wrong about the defense, and I think I've got good reason for being often wrong about the defense because it always should have been better than what we saw on the field. So other than that, if you're going to say I'm the minister of mayhem and that, you know, we're going to be aggressive, this is how we're going to go after it, we're going to pressure the quarterback, we're going to make him make mistakes, put him in long third down situations, blah, 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 and then say, well, except when we play a team that might make that strategy suspect in some way, then we'll change to accommodate that change in opponent. Does it work that way? Do you have an identity, but you give up that identity based on who the opponent is? That's confusing to me.
Yeah, it's an identity versus a chameleon. And it's interesting. A couple things I want to point out, Jason, and we'll come to you about this, and we're contractually obligated to go an hour, but I don't think we need to. And shout out to the 385, almost 400 people in here. I think you see who the dedicated football people are with that number. You also see that in the stands yesterday. Who are the hardcore football people? You saw that, and you're really going to see it on Saturday. But a couple positives I want to point out. Caleb Cost, great interception, great run after the catch. Kid's been picked on multiple times, and he made a play there. DeAndre Boykins, I thought, had some good run. He needs to get some playing time on limited snaps yesterday. I thought he looked good. But, Jason, the fundamental issue here is the offense is not as good as it has been, which we knew that was going to happen. The defense has sort of been a letdown. My question to you is why? It is not talent in my mind.
Oh, I think a lot of it is talent.
Is everything you see what's wrong with this team and this defense talent-based? Because that's an out. That is an out, I think.
So it's not all talent, but it is multiple years of malpractice on the defensive line, coaching some of the most talented guys you had, and then not being good enough. Again, how many times are we going to say this is a line of scrimmage game?
And you saw Minnesota last night make it a line of scrimmage game against Southern Cal and win.
Yep. And that's a Minnesota team that Carolina beat.
Yep.
Right? So the thing is, it's a line of scrimmage game, and if you watch these games closely on the line of scrimmage, if you just watch what's happening on the offensive and defensive line, it's pretty clear what's happening. I mean, what's our yards per carry here? Yards per rush, sack adjusted rushing average, 4 yards per carry for Pitt, 4.7 for North Carolina, and then sack adjusted yards per pass attempt, 9.1 and 5.6. So tell me what's happening. Here's the thing. They're okay against the run, not good enough to keep a team like Pitt under 4 yards per carry. But as soon as they go to the pass, unless you're bringing pressure, you're not getting a bunch of pressure on the quarterback. 24% pressure rate is not all that great. And then on the back end, when teams are getting one-on-ones against your backers, your safeties, your nickel, and one of your corners, they keep getting wins. So you combine the inability to get a bunch of pressure on the quarterback. How many times yesterday when they didn't blitz did they get pressure?
So I know Ruck had maybe one or two, and Des Evans had a couple.
And the two that Rucker had, at least one of them was when he was lined up at a backer and came as a fifth rusher. So the thing is, when you look at this, when you look at what's happening, they're not getting enough pressure when they don't rush when they don't rush, 5 or more. And then when they do rush 5 or more, they're losing one-on-ones in the back end. And really the biggest issue that they're having defensively right now is they're losing a lot of one-on-ones in the passing game. Some of that's technique. Some of it is, against JMU, the big problem was less one-on-ones than they had just catastrophic miscommunications and problems in terms of basic match principles and different things in terms of who's got what guy passing through what zone and communication and passing all that off. That was a problem. Less of a problem in this game, still sometimes have a little hiccup there or whatever. But the bigger problem is that you have guys that are winning one-on-ones against you. And then on the other side of the ball, you have a senior in J.J. Jones who gets an opportunity to make a catch for a touchdown and puts the ball on the ground, doesn't finish the catch, doesn't win the one-on-one, and then you're in a 4th and 1 situation or 4th and 2 situation that you don't get. A lot of Carolina's problems right now boil down to their opponents are winning one-on-ones against them, especially in the passing game. And when it comes time for them to win one-on-ones in their own passing game, they're not winning those. You can't convince me that when you consistently lose one-on-ones, that's not personnel. At least partly. So, and right now, what I see with Jeff Collins is a guy that when they played against Minnesota, they played heavy because they didn't believe Minnesota had the horses to beat them in terms of one-on-ones down the field, and they were right. But when they've played teams that have the players that can, that guy can beat that corner, that guy can beat our nickel, that guy can beat the safety that he's going to be one-on-one with, they've been less ready to put those guys on an island because they keep getting beat. That's what I think it's pretty simple. And you're not having your guys win those matchups. You lose those games.
I don't 100% disagree with you. But I also
you do
think,
disagree. I see it in your face.
Well, my thing is I watched Vanderbilt beat Alabama. Are we going to argue that Vanderbilt has the talent of Alabama?
If you play that game 10 times, do you think Vanderbilt wins more than 2?
No, they don't win but 1, but they won.
Right. But that was their Super Bowl against Alabama. Alabama beat Georgia the week before. And basically what you're dealing with, if you're North Carolina, you are JMU's Super Bowl, right? When you're playing Pitt, it's even. And Alabama, when they play even, win more than 50% of the time. And they only play maybe 1 or 2 even games a year, right? 50-50 game. Talent-wise, Pitt, we said this going into the year. Remember, we said Pitt is, basically it's a coin flip type game. It turned into basically a coin flip type game. And what it boiled down to is Pitt's quarterback executed a little bit better in key situations, and they had guys win one-on-one matchups down the field that Carolina's guys didn't. J.J. Jones catches the ball like he's supposed to as a senior leader on this team. When he's got a one-on-one opportunity and the ball hits his hands, you might win the football game. Mumford made that catch for a 40-yard play that got them down inside the 5-yard line. He made another one-on-one catch for a touchdown. The difference is pretty clear in terms of how that works. Carolina is not winning those matchups. And this, by the way, I've been very cautious. I've been very clear about why coaches tend to be cautious about playing young wide receivers. And there's been enough reason when you look at the young wide receivers to say, yeah, he's got to earn his way on the field. But here's the thing. If your vet wide receivers can't make those one-on-one plays and consistently don't, and you've got a couple of the young guys that have shown the capacity to maybe start making those, I think at this point in the year, it might be a time to start looking at some of the young guys that might give you, if not immediately, maybe 2 or 3 games down the line, might start winning more of those one-on-ones for you. Because they do have talent in that group.
So in 50-50 games, Buck, what's it come down to? Because Carolina's got like 10 of them, and they haven't seemed to win one of them yet, except Minnesota. What's it come down to when it's a 50-50 coin flip game? What do you what takes the next step?
A lot of it is exactly what Jason talked about, is that players North Carolina's going against are making plays, and North Carolina does not have those playmakers doing that. We talked about the receivers a little bit. There was a 57% catch rate yesterday for UNC.
That's not good.
That's not good. So, I think some of that may be that there's, when you see it's like porn. When you see good chemistry between a quarterback and his receiver, you know it, right? You know what that is. And we're not seeing it. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing that with North Carolina's receivers and the quarterback. Their chemistry is not there. And so part of that drop rate is due to the unfamiliarity, I think, between Chris Rail and his receivers. Drake May had, a year and a half of throwing to receivers before he ever stepped on the field, and Criswell did not have that. So I think part of it is unfamiliarity as far as the chemistry goes. But okay, I used a word you don't normally use on Sunday. Get over it, people. You're grown.
The chat is hilarious.
The problem is that that lack of familiarity extends all over the field. Stick Lane missing that interception. He was just a step slow. They're a step slow in getting to the ball. They're a step slow making the block. They're a step slow getting around a defender. They're just a step slow. And what that's due to, I don't think is necessarily their innate speed, but they just don't know what to do half the time. So I'm going to leave now before I get in worse trouble than I'm already in.
Let me give some shout outs. Bob on the chat watched us from Sorrento, Italy last week. Props to that. That might get the award. I know there's been people in the Middle East watching us as well. Shout out to where you're watching us from. Jason, let's wrap this one up. It's getting hot in here. I just think I think this North Carolina team is rudderless, and I think it starts at the top. And I think the locker room, the confidence and all in the players, you're not seeing. I think Mack has sort of fostered that a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit overall. But your thoughts here. Georgia Tech comes in. Georgia Tech's a team that's given Carolina a lot of grief over the years, and Carolina's got to figure out a way to turn this around. And I think y'all have talked about the talent issue. I think it's a more of a coaching issue. Eventually we'll find out. But where to now, Jason? I've entitled it Free Falling. Tom Petty, we've already talked about that. But close us out here where North Carolina can right this ship before it craters too far to get it back, regardless of who the coach is, at least in the next year or two.
Well, I'm looking at how much time we've been on the air. I'm not sure I can last 8 minutes on this last segment, but
I would think you probably could. But we're getting out of here before or now. We're gonna stop playing before the 60 minutes is up.
But I will say that Buck has, I think, revealed a little bit more about how things go once it gets unpleasant watching Carolina.
Chemistry matters, people.
Yeah. So I don't know that there's much I can really do with this from here, but in any case, I think Carolina has to find. They've got to find one guy, and yesterday. McCollum played well yesterday. I mean, 10 catches on 13 targets. This was kind of Minnesota from last year, McCollum. And if they keep getting that McCollum, that really helps. But they've got to find somebody who can complement McCollum and especially Hampton on the offensive side that just consistently wins one-on-ones on the outside. J.J. Jones hasn't been doing it. Five targets, 2 catches, 36 yards. The catches down the field just didn't happen. And the big opportunities didn't happen. So they've got to figure out, getting back to the initial discussion, if you want to win football games, and especially if you're not dominant on defense, you want to win football games, you win it with touchdowns. Oh, and by the way, you brought up that Vanderbilt-Alabama game. How did Vandy beat Alabama? How many times did they go for it on 4th down and make the play and have, a special wrinkle there to actually get a big play on 4th down? I mean, the play of that game was probably the play action, little tight end pop, little slip where they threw for and they had a receiver as well go downfield on this. They threw for a 35-yard touchdown on 4th and 1. That broke that game open. And then there was another one down inside the red zone where they went for it on 4th down and got it. The fact of the matter is, Vandy went out and they made the plays to win the game, and they scored touchdowns against Alabama. If they kick field goals in that situation, Alabama ultimately outclasses them down the stretch. And the reason Alabama does that is they got guys like a 17-year-old Ryan Williams, who's an absolute freak show. Right? When you have teams that have that kind of dude, you better pull out the stops. And they played to win the game, and when they rolled the dice, they kept coming up, they kept coming up big. Carolina needs to figure out, is Ship that kind of guy? Is Billups that kind of guy? What do they have? How can they work on getting to where Criswell hits some of the deep shots? I mean, that right now is the missing part in the offense. They've been able to run the football. They ran the football pretty well against Duke, but they're not hitting deep shots with any sort of reliability, and they're not making these plays in key fourth down tight situations. So they've got to figure out how to win on the margins, and it starts with that. You've got to have the playmaker make the plays, and you've got to set them up with something special in your kind of 2-point conversion type plays on fourth down. If you're going to go for it, you better not just be calling run of the mill like, oh, let's just call curl flats. Like, you better have stuff up your sleeve if you're going to do it. So fully commit to it. That's kind of where I come in.
One other point about the fourth down situations and analytics, so we keep that nice and sore going into the next week, is in that one of those, that first fourth down that they did make in the red zone, in that same drive, they converted 2 fourth downs before they ever got to that fourth down. They converted 2 fourth downs on that same drive. If they're following the old school way of doing things, they would have attempted a field goal 3 or 4 plays ago if they could have gotten within range. So they had some success on fourth down twice in a row in that same drive before they went for it on that third time in the red zone.
Analytics don't mean squat if you're not prepared to
execute. You're just pandering to the crowd now, Tommy.
No. I've been sitting here stewing the whole time. I'm not even looking at the chat. I mean, it doesn't. To Jason's point, if you're going to have a plan to follow the analytics, then have a plan to do something when the analytics tell you to do something, and that's the issue. And that's why I say kick the field goal, take the easy route, because the road that is tough has not been very kind to North Carolina football in a while. And I stand by my rudderless comment. They don't have a plan. Everybody has one until what? You get punched in the mouth. Famous Mike Tyson. And North Carolina at this point, absolutely. Mike Tyson and Customato knew it then. Carolina needs to figure it out. Georgia Tech comes to Kenan Stadium. And my point about Vanderbilt and Alabama and these teams winning games that they shouldn't, it's not talent. It's coaching, discipline, execution, accountability, that on any given Sunday, while the shade will be that any team can lose, it's actually that any team can win, given they play with those things. And we saw it on Saturday, plenty, just not in Kenan Stadium. Jason Staples, Buck Sanders, Congruity. Let me do this, Matt at congruityhr.com. If 384 people in the chat go to Matt at congruityhr.com and get a free assessment, we will all have a better day, because small to mid-sized businesses will take off and be a big part of the local economy and the local money-making areas. Matt and Darren, they've got great customer service. Check them out. Anything left, Buck, for this? Is there anything left? Your famous saying is the feathers off that bird. I think we've plucked it.
I would agree with that.
One last second.
I'll give you that, and just make sure it goes on your bingo card, not mine.
It'll be on my bingo card. What will be on the next bingo card in Kenan Stadium? At noon, another Kegs and Eggs tailgate in the Bowles lot, Inside Carolina Live, next Saturday at 9 a.m. Stay tuned for Taylor Viplis and Jeff Schottmer. Somebody asked for basketball coverage. There's plenty of it coming. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And there's some baseball coverage, courtesy of Grace Nugent on the boards as well. Everybody take care. Be safe. Shout out and prayers up to Tylee Craft and the folks in hurricane-ravaged areas. Keep the faith and keep staying strong. We'll be back soon enough.
I think we had pretty good chemistry today.